I'd like to welcome Olivier Richon from the Royal College of Art, Professor in Photography. He's been very kind enough to let us interview him today on ideas to do with intentionality and meaning regarding the movement Intentism. So you're very welcome. Thank you so much for allowing us to do this at such late notice. And if you don't mind, I'll read each question out and then we can see what happens from there. Okay, thank you very much. So our first question to you would be, if a Royal College of Art student goes out and paints a landscape from life, would there be any difference in the meaning between the natural landscape and the painting? Does the fact that the painting has an author imbue the work with meaning that natural evolution does not have?
Okay, well, that's quite a long question, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a funny one, because yes, I don't know of any RCA student who would paint a landscape.
Right, okay.
Go out to paint it.
Yes.
May do a landscape from existing images,
mm-hmm,
but perhaps the idea of going into the landscape to paint,
sure,
like an impressionist.
Right.
I'm not sure that they do that.
Shall I,
but
doesn't
matter. Doesn't matter. Let's imagine.
Okay.
That.
Good.
Yeah. So yes, of course, there is a huge difference between the landscape and the painting.
Right.
I don't think the landscape in itself would mean anything in
mm-hmm
particular,
sure,
actually. But the landscape in itself is not an image,
mm-hmm,
and would mean different things, whether you're, a walker, a farmer, or an artist.
yes.
And one may like the beauty in nature. I mean, and aesthetics indeed used to take up nature as an example of the beautiful. But of course, painting or an artifact is completely different.
What I'm coming to as well with this
is completely different. So what?
Yes.
You want to talk about meaning?
Yeah, and
yeah,
what I found interesting with the question, I probably haven't worded it too well, was that if there is something that looks similar to something else, but is a product of random chance, with no author, no mind behind it, or there's the same image that has an intentional mind that has decided to do certain things for a reason, does, even though the product is identical, is the meaning different because one has a creative mind behind it and one is pure accident?
But hang on, the product is not identical.
Right, okay.
Because the landscape, nature and an image of nature are completely different.
Right, okay.
One is natural, one is cultural. Or
okay.
Well, a lot of landscape is cultural too because it's made. So
you think anything that's accidental can ever have meaning? So, for example, if I saw clouds that looked like a still life,
yes,
is that the same? Does that have meaning, even though it's a pure accident?
Well, it depends where the meaning comes from.
Right. Okay.
For me, the meaning comes from various directions.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from the viewer.
Right. Okay.
But it comes as well from the culture. So it's not just me deciding what it means.
Yes.
But what you want to talk really is intentionality. Could I ask you, why is intentionality important?
I think it's important because I think the initial building block that we start with as people that in the art movement is that that art, any creative product, initially is a result of a human gesture. That's how we base it. So, for example, language, as Saussure said, is ultimately arbitrary sounds. If you listen to music is just sound waves. Art is just the colours is different waves. But what gives it meaning rather than just arbitrary randomness would be a mind behind it that's constructed it to make a finished product that's a gesture to the world. And because we think of it as a human gesture rather than, say, as we say, arbitrary evolutionary accidents, that doesn't have any intended meaning behind it, but because an artist is painting this as a product, as a gesture to give people, to show people as something that he has a gesture to the world, we think it imbues it with a different kind of meaning. Even if it's impossible to find omnisciently or perfectly, it's somehow different and distinct because of that mind behind it.
I think for me there are different forms of signification, and I think all art is intentional, even if it's seeking chance.
Yes.
Because that's my intention, to use chance. So it's totally intentional.
Yes, yes.
If I say I'm going to do something blindfolded, that's my intention.
Yes, yeah.
So there's no art that is not intentional in a very broad way.
Yes.
Yeah. However, where I would probably disagree with you, but before I disagree with you, I would say something else about intention. For me, intention is more like a scaffolding. So you need a scaffolding in order to build something.
Yes.
But then you remove it somehow, normally. You may keep it, but it's unusual. So often intention is a springboard for making a work. But where I think there is a distinction is between intention and realization, and then interpretation or reading.
Do you think, one quick question, as
but there is definitely intention. But whereas the viewer or the public should read the intention of the artist,
yes,
I say no. Why not? Why? Why if intentions are terribly boring and the work is fantastic?
Well,
or what if intentions are great but the work is tedious?
Yes.
So I think there is intentions need to be there.
Yes.
But why should they need to be received?
Yes.
Sort of unaltered by the viewer.
I'll just make one comment on that.
My question to you.
Yeah, well, one comment on that, and then we can stay on the same subject and move on to the next question. It's up to you. Paisley Livingston has written a good response, I believe, to that in his book Art and Intention, and he would say that when you're looking at intention, it's purely to do with the meaning of the work. It's not about the quality of the work. And the job of a critic would be to judge the quality as well as the meaning. And he would say that if you have a realised intention, you've successfully put your intention to a work that was a meagre intention, then the work obviously wouldn't be of the same stature, wouldn't be the same quality as if you had a greater, more visionary intention. So intention for Intentists is primary focus on meaning. And we would separate it from for the aesthetic value and the quality of the work as being something else, and would be much more related to the viewer and how it resonates with the person. Should we have a look at the next question? Or?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Isn't a piece of art always a result of a human gesture? So I kind of mentioned this actually, at a certain place and time. If so, how important in arts education is the study of the context that a work was produced in? So biography, context, all those sort of situations. Is it relevant at all when understanding a work?
So here the question is, there's an argument underneath this question, I think, is that...
Yes, back to thinking about...
Aren't you sort of asking, what happens if one just looks at the work with no knowledge of anything?
Yeah, I'm kind of suggesting or asking...
Are you suggesting that that's perhaps not a good idea?
No, I think it's a very good idea to look at the work. I think the primary place to find meaning is in the work, but the question is asking that if artists are always thrown, using a Heidegger term, thrown into the world, the place and time, and they can't sort of cut themselves out of that, and there's no such thing as singularity of authorship, they're always looking around, interpreting the world. If, when you do look at the work, you cut off that world, that culture, their life, everything that brought the work to be, and you only look at the work, could you be missing out on something rather than actually looking at the life, the context, the world that brought this work to be?
Yeah, I guess they're different experiences. Like if one goes to an exhibition, you have people who need the context, the life, and they buy the guide.
Yes.
And they can't look unless they have that. And others want none of it. I think, in a sense, having both is the best thing.
Right.
Because I think that there is an interest in the biography, not necessarily because that's where the truth lies, but it's a great narrative.
Yes.
It's like a story.
Yes.
And the context is essential. And I think the meaning of the work is not fixed. Maybe that's something in your intentism you may disagree, but I think meaning isn't fixed, and it is in flux. But yet it's not a free for all.
Sure. How would you decide if you agreed with, say, intentionality, then obviously the fixed cornerstone, the foundation of the meaning would be coming back to intention. So even if you found it hard to understand intention clearly, that would still be your goal. But if you remove that and you said that meaning isn't fixed, but maybe not all intentions are valid, you can have intentions that are wrong, how do you ever define or decide which one is the wrong one? Where do you go?
Well, you have to make a judgment.
Based on what?
Well, in a sense, it's an aesthetic judgment.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So an artist could never...
An aesthetic judgment is a weird thing.
Right, okay.
It's something Kant has spent a whole book thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that I can emit a judgment that, has no proof, but yet claims, it comes from me as a subject, that it aims at being universal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a claim. Yeah.
What would happen if...
That's the oddity for him,
yes,
as a philosopher. That's the oddity of the aesthetic judgment.
So if someone saw a work here or another artist's work and said that you were expressing vehement, aggressive racism, and that's in your work, would that matter to you? Would that be just much free? How would you defend your work then against that?
That wouldn't be that would be a judgment, a moral judgment,
right?
Which is that you can argue, but
you wouldn't be able to say I didn't intend it to be racist. I'm not a racist, because that wouldn't be valid. It
wouldn't be enough.
So what would you have to do?
That would be a case where the author is not good at reading his own work.
So the work would be racist.
Yeah.
Right, I understand. Yeah.
For me.
Uh-huh.
I think it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Or sexist, or
Yes.
It often happens.
Uh-huh.
People sort of project their prejudices and without, not consciously.
Oh, okay. So you are racist unconsciously, and it came out in the work, possibly.
Could be. Or one is not aware of how others may see it.
Right. Going back to the culture you mentioned before.
So I think, it's funny, perhaps another question is, who do we make work for?
Mm-hmm.
Somehow. It's a complicated question, because one can have a conscious audience, like the art market, or I make work to be in a battle with another artist, for instance, dead or alive.
Yes.
Or I make work, or maybe I don't know exactly who I make work for.
Mm-hmm.
Who is this other person?
Yes.
For whom I make it. Maybe it's unconscious, or maybe someone has to work for.
Do you think it would matter if you had two artists both producing work that was considered racist, and one artist didn't really think about his audience, as you said, properly, and was not in any sense racist at all, but the viewer saw it as racism, and the other artist was equally accused of racism and was a staunch racist bigot? Do you think it would mean? Do you think that would mean anything with the art, or would it not have any relationship to the art at all? Because the art still has the same result in the audience's eyes.
It's difficult to answer purely logically, without actually seeing what this work would be. Actually, I found this quite difficult. But often this, in the example of a work being sexist or racist, it's often part of the culture.
Yes.
And it's easier to say, look at this work, it's so colonial, because it was produced 50 years ago and all that.
Yes.
But that's an easy critique.
Sure.
Because one has the hindsight and one has a historical perspective. It's more that's interesting to think of works now.
Yes, Excellent.
But that's again a question of the beholder as well. There was a famous picture by a photographer called Gary Winogrand. A beautiful picture, actually, because he was one of his excellent street photographer, that showed in Brooklyn Zoo, I think, or anyway, a zoo in New York, and there was a beautiful light, all that black and white, and we have a black man, a blonde woman, and I think the black man is holding a monkey. So the question is, perhaps to answer, is the image racist, or because of this stupid jokes about what would happen with an intercourse between black and a white woman, or is it, or isn't it? You know what?
My position
where is it? Where is it? You know,
Yes.
it probably wasn't in the head of the photographer
Yes.
to make a racist image.
Yes.
He made an image where skill and chance, the chance encounter,
Yes.
you know, produced that.
Yeah. My position
So, you know,
would
is
be,
it in the beholder there, or
well, I would see that the beholder is very, very important, but
a
settle with-
racist would laugh at the
Yes.
image.
Yes.
But if you're not a racist,
Mm-hmm.
would you see it as racist? Would you? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think there is
Well,
an openness there. There is an ambiguity.
I'm sure there's a massive ambiguity, but
Yeah.
I think that all those different perspectives on art that are different to the intention of the artist are one of the things that makes art have a great richness,
Yeah.
but I consider them being significances. But I think we have to be careful with significances, because that's a word from E.D. Hirsch, who was a literary theorist, and it kind of sounds like it undervalues the interpretation. Oh, it's just a significance. So I'm not sure if it's the best word, but I think you can have it, like for example the Eros statue in Piccadilly wasn't commissioned as Eros, and the sculptor wasn't thinking it was Eros. But the fact that 99.9% of the people think it's Eros still, to me, doesn't discredit or null the fact that the artist was intending to be somebody else or something else.
Yeah.
But those are these wonderful kind of multi-layered significances that other people can have about a work.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Should we have a look at the next question?
Sure.
Question 3 then. Much of the theory that rules out artist intention as relevant to an art's work meaning came from literary theory, so Barthes' Death of the Author, Foucault's What is an Author, etc. Do you think there are fundamental differences between interpreting texts and the visual arts? Because why I said that is a lot of these writers did enter a little bit on the visual arts, but that wasn't their specialism. And I'm just wondering whether a lot of the theory that we've got for saying that the artist isn't relevant, that did spring a lot from literary theory, whether a text, the way we hermeneutically interpret a text, isn't quite the same as interpreting a visual presence of a work or a photograph or a painting or a sculpture.
No, I think the sense you encounter with the object is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. In a sense, yes, I mean, but what if you see the visual work as a text, which is indeed what somebody like Barthes would do.
Mm-hmm.
But what does it mean exactly to say, I see an image as a text? It's a weird thing to say, if you think of it. It's quite provocative.
Yeah.
It seems to me that there is a link between image and text, between seeing and reading, which I think is very productive.
Yes.
Because then it brings the question that you're interested in, the question of meaning, between seeing and meaning.
Yes.
So, although there is a fundamental difference, I think, in a sense, artists and art theorists can learn a lot from literary theory, in my view, very productively. And on the other hand, as well, a lot of some works coming from literature, maybe more poetry, are amazingly visual. If I think of Mallarmé, for instance, the way he breaks up the sentence in some of his poems, it's spatial. It's utterly spatial.
Sure.
So you would have moments where the two coexist. However, I mean, sometimes it can be forced to always see an image as a text. Maybe some images are more akin to that.
Yes.
When one deals with representations, for instance.
Your point reminds me of Jacques Derrida. Sometimes his books will be written in a very unusual way, the way the words are laid out on the page, all sorts of things, and more like a visual piece of work.
Also, he does that with the theory. But with Barthes, it's funny because Barthes, his Death of the Author, is really attacking critics. He's not attacking authors. I mean, I haven't read it recently, but I've forgotten even when it was written, in the 60s, I think. No? Late 60s, early 70s?
Late 60s,
And in a sense, he's attacking critics who only want to look at the biography and who think that, I don't know if it's the same as what you think, but the ultimate meaning of the work is the property of the author. In the sense that what is attacking.
Yes, yes.
And he says something nice. He says the author can be a guest in his own work,
Mm-hmm.
somehow, in terms of.
Yes, yeah. Where I think where we'd stand on your first thing you mentioned actually is that whereby people like Schleimark and people like that were deeply concerned with biography. We think biography can be useful, but we would separate that. We would think that post-structuralists and other people like that have said some very profitable things that would be foolish to actually deny. They're very, very real.
Yeah.
So we would say that biography may be helpful, it may not be totally helpful, but for finding a meaning in a work. But we would say the intention is a sole source, because we would say that if, for example, we would separate cause and intention. If this is a terrible example, but if somebody like Hitler was found that he was treated very, very badly by a Jewish child when he was growing up, and that led him to do all these different things to the Jews in the Second World War. The fact that that was never his intention to do that to spite that child. He did it because he had various other motives against the Jews, meant that wasn't the meaning of what he was doing against the Jews, but it was the cause. So we've kind of separated, and that cause is biographical, and we say that isn't directly relevant to meaning. It's just its cause alone, where the intention at the time would be related to meaning. So we would certainly hold on to certain things that Barthes would criticise biography for, definitely.
Also, Barthes wrote his own biography. I don't know if you've read it.
I haven't, no.
Yeah, it's called Barthes by Barthes.
Yes.
And it starts with, this has to be read as a character in a fiction. So.
Well, he's consistent then, isn't he, with his theory, I guess?
He is, absolutely.
Yes.
But on the other hand, it's fascinating because it basically refers to himself as the third person, I think. But so it is like a character in fiction.
Yes, yes.
But it's still a biography.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there is some truth. I think one of the things he said, which I do certainly believe in, although I don't think the cause in to say the author has necessarily died at all. When he speaks about textile quotations in work, and I think that's certainly true, and I think it's the same in biography. So I can understand why he might have done that. Whenever you read a biography, whose biography you're reading, whose position are you reading, whose memories are you reading, because there's going to be many things that won't really have happened, where there's a bias in opinion, there's something fictional sort of thing.
Absolutely. You know? Don't you think biography is a genre?
Yeah, I think so.
You know, that follows some stylistic constraints.
Yes,
actually.
definitely.
Yeah.
Do you need to?
No.
Shall we have a look at the next question?
Yeah.
Number 4 says, one of the arguments of theorists such as the new critics is that as language is essentially public, commonly understood, a reader should be able to make an interpretation from the text alone, and hence anything outside the text is irrelevant. Do you consider art to be equally public? Is there a similar, transparent, comprehensive grammar of modern art that means we don't need to look at genre, place, time, artistic intention? Furthermore, if art is public, does this contradict the need for informed art teachers? What I meant by that, just in case it's badly worded or unclear, is that new critics and even people that maybe wouldn't consider themselves a new critic particularly, would say, language, we all have a basic understanding of what words mean or what grammar means. Language could be defined as a way of communicating that people all understand. So if I look at a text, everything is there. You can't have a private language. It's all public. So if it's not in the text, it's not relevant. It's not relevant to meaning. And my question is, grammar and vocabulary is so specific. We all learn it at school. It's very, very complex. Is there such a detailed grammar for art? Or is it just very basic that certain colours like red inspire certain sort of public feelings of anger or passion, but the rest is so subjective that either you'll get a million interpretations for a million viewers, or if you want to have some kind of meaning, you would need to look at biography, intention, artists' ideas?
Well, I think a lot of works create their own grammar. I mean, they refer to others, but they create their own grammar, so I don't think it's that's transparent.
Right.
Although it's in the public domain, I don't think it's transparent
Right.
Yeah, I don't think it's
so how would we get to understand their own personal
because I
grammar?
think artists actually like to work against grammar.
Mm-hmm.
They like to break the obviousness and transparency of science and language.
Right, okay. And how would we understand
so
what they're doing?
they are iconoclast.
Okay.
The interesting ones at
Yes.
least. So perhaps for me, I think they work against communication. Because communication is like a transparent thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have the color blue there, and it's being communicated there.
Right, okay.
That's transparency of communication. Very useful. I mean, if you send images, you want them to be sent properly, or if you talk on the telephone, you want to be understood.
Yes.
But in terms of meaning, communication is not very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning is more complex, I think.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I agree.
That would be my view.
How do you know whether
But
they
I
are?
don't. It's funny. This.
Yes.
Yes, there is a public, there is a common ground, but
Mhm.
it's constantly being. I don't know. I think a lot of art works against the common ground.
And how do you know if it is working against the common ground? If you saw a painting that was red, and the common ground is that, so let's say, to suggest violence or love or sex or something like that, and they're using that red for a wholly different ideas or thoughts, where they're trying to go against and break the common ground. How would I know that? Why wouldn't I just go away thinking it's about love? Or does it matter? It doesn't matter.
You could. I don't think it provides answers necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe it provides more questions rather than an answer.
Yeah, but how would I know they're asking questions? Why won't I just go away and think it's love and just leave it?
You could. Yeah.
Will we ever find out if an artist is trying to break communication without asking him, though? Won't we always just think he's saying red is love without asking anybody?
But if you make a painting of an image, you don't say anything. You show something.
Yes.
So
how would we ever know an artist is trying to break communication?
By looking at the work, I guess.
Yeah.
Or by not. In a sense, by trying to make an interpretation, by using language.
Right.
Again, I think it's probably this link between image and language.
Yes.
And indeed, I mean, in art school, a lot of time is spent discussing work.
Mm-hmm.
Like being a viewer for one's peers.
Mm-hmm.
Practice.
How important do you think that's in art education?
Oh, it's essential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why there are art schools, I think.
Yes.
It's for this discussion to take place.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, thank you. Let's have a look at the next question then. Many theorists, Heidegger, Gadamer, Ricoeur, have said that we understand a work by fusing the narrative of the work with the narrative of our lives. Texts, film and music are linear and generally have a narrative order. Hence we can have a shared experience of them. However, does all sculpture, painting, photography have such a rigid order of what is experienced? Do I need to begin and end at the same place as everyone else? If not, might this affect my interpretation of the work? This is something that I think Intentism is debating, that doesn't seem to be thought of in a great deal before, and that is that a lot of these theorists that were based mainly in literary theory were looking at texts, and texts obviously have a beginning and an end, and you need to read each word before the next word and each letter before the next letter. It's completely linear. And then they would use that idea of this kind of horizon of our own lives, a narrative of our own journey being thrown into the world, like Heidegger might say, with the narrative, the journey of this linear work as well, and so that we can fuse the two together. But and then they use this is then often used in a lot of fine art. But I'm just thinking whether they've overstretched themselves, because if I look at, say, your photographs, I would think that there is way you've done your photography, there is often one image, so I guess that most people would look at the image before the background, but you wouldn't be able to define anything particularly more detailed than that. You wouldn't be able to say what I need to look at next and then next in a linear form like words on a page or musical score. I don't need to start or stop at the same place as anybody else. So do you think that means that a lot of the interpretation of art is not the same as the interpretation of text, because I can come and go, stop and start whenever I like?
Yeah, in one sense, in a basic sense, you are right. I mean, the text is, words follow one another, and you don't have that with sculpture, painting, photography, or things like that. But on the other hand, I often start a book by the end.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing stops me from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't finish it. I don't know.
Sure.
We can have a spatial reading
Mm-hmm.
also.
Yes.
Just as we can have perhaps a linear viewing of art,
Yes.
which is probably wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I see people in galleries, they follow the pictures on the wall. They actually
Yes.
adopt a linear reading,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have to.
Yes. Well, I'm sure in curation, once you've got an exhibition, then it is linear, isn't it? There is an order you're going to, and it'd be hard when you see an art exhibition.
Yeah.
It's hard not to compare one painting with one prior to it, but a work on its own, where there's nothing in before or after. It doesn't have that kind of linear quality. I'm just thinking, if I looked at a Derrida book and I just opened it up randomly and looked at a sentence and pulled it out of context, I could imagine even Derrida, if I wrote an article saying what Derrida said with something out of context, might want to say, read the context. Because there's an order to it. If you're having an argument, you're trying to get a point across.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no such thing in art like that. And I think a lot of theorists, my question to you is, when we've taken a lot of theories from literature and put it into our argument for art, maybe we've overreached ourselves because it doesn't have this linear quality that we go on this journey.
No, you're right. One has to establish a distinction between the two. But then I think one has to see how fruitful it can be.
Yes.
To use thinkers, who clearly have a background in literature. I think. Because literature is so broad and complex. I mean, so is art. But
do you think?
And again, art historians, they have to write, so
yes,
they deal with language, and they have to order their thoughts.
Sure.
So, but there is a challenge with the visual, that one is not, there is more uncertainty, I think, and that uncertainty of interpretation, uncertainty of vision, and I think that's good. That perhaps what makes it specific.
When you look at a work, even though it's not linear, do you think that there's the shuttlecock approach, where you can, when you look at a painting and you look at one area and then you look at the area, another area, and then go back to the first area, do you think that all these different shapes and colours constantly change your thoughts of the work as you go back and forth all around it? So you look at a brownie, then you look at a blue, and then you look back at the brown looks a different brown than it did before. Does it have that kind of quality to it?
Well, I guess with painting, people can do that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
With photography deals more with representations.
Yes.
So maybe it's not tactile enough.
Mm-hmm.
Photography is not tactile.
Yes.
That's for sure.
Sure.
It's more like it's closer to a text, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's print as well, so it's closer to.
In your photography,
ink.
where do you think? I know that you would suggest intention isn't something that we should hold on to dearly for meaning, but where would you find the intention? Your intention has the most effect. Would it be when you're editing which photograph you choose, or?
I think there are different moments of intention.
Yes.
You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's the intention of having a subject, choosing a subject, or not knowing how to choose one.
Yes.
It's all around intentionality. But the crucial one is in the selection. A bit like making a film. It's in the editing. It's as crucial.
Would you ever, talking about meaning with the reader and how important the audience is,
and also the way it's made, or the printing
Yes.
changes the perception.
when you were talking about how important the viewer is for everything, would you ever then think that it would be a right thing and an interesting thing, once you've taken a whole roll of film, to not be in charge of the editing process and letting the audience choose the photographs?
Yeah, one could do that.
You could do that.
One could do that. It would be a more participatory way of working. I don't think I would particularly be into it, but I know people who've done it. Or giving the cameras to the audience.
Yes.
or to a group of people who become the audience.
Yes.
Yeah.
But even as you said,
Yeah.
that's an intentioned
Yeah,
act to even do that. That's a very intentional decision, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So you always have intention.
Yes.
Yeah.
Should we have a look at the next one? Is that all right? Okay, number 6. When discussing artwork at college, would you accept every interpretation from the student as equally valid? So again, I guess we're looking back at some of the things, like if someone says something was racist. If not, by what criteria can we rule out an interpretation? So could you ever have a student that obviously knows nothing about artwork that would say something and you'd ever say, well, I'm not sure if that's I think you're more on the right lines with this student's interpretation than that. Could you ever say that, or would that be inappropriate because the viewer has been reborn?
Well, it's difficult to answer it. I don't think every interpretation is equally valid. Some are more interesting than others, and more pertinent than others. I think it needs to work. I don't know. Or maybe it's not the word interpretation. Maybe it's, some comments on the work may highlight something that was completely overlooked by the maker.
Right.
And that becomes interesting. I mean, the typical exercise is to have a crit, to tell the person who's done the work, you're not allowed to speak. We're going to discuss your work.
Yes.
And it's quite painful for some. They keep on saying, but I've never meant that, or you're completely wrong. But somehow they can't say.
Yes.
And so that you see, then you see the power of interpretation. Again, some are relevant, some are irrelevant.
How do you decide if something's irrelevant? What criteria?
I think it's easier the other way around. It's when you ask a student, okay, talk about your work, and they say, my work is about, my work is about this and that.
Yeah.
And everybody says, well, we can't notice anything. Or my work is very personal, it's about when I was a child. And somehow that's totally, it may be interesting, but it's inaccessible in the work.
Yes.
Although it may have been useful to make a work.
Would you say then that inaccessible is an interesting word? Sorry.
Inaccessible in the work.
So would you say that it means it has a meaning related to their childhood, but it's inaccessible, or so it's there, but it hasn't been communicated well, or it's not even there?
It's not even, in my case, it's not even there.
Right.
Yeah. But then it becomes interesting, because how could it be there, or could it be there, and then the work can evolve, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, should we have a look at the last question, please? Should functional art, design and the applied arts have different rules of interpretation for art's sake pieces of work? So, for example, functional things like chairs and tables, even though they can be artistic, do we interpret them differently than, say, an abstract painting that isn't there to cause someone to do anything directly or specifically?
Well, some designers want it both ways, because they want their chair to be a functional statement, an art statement, and a philosophical statement. So I think there's an interesting merging between art and design sometimes.
Yes.
But often there isn't. I think design is much more self-conscious. Actually, intentions are much clearer in design.
Yes.
And because of the design process that I don't know much about, but at the production process, it has to go into industrial production.
Yes.
And there's a series of mediations and decisions that make it much more, very, very different.
Yes. Interesting.
From an artwork.
The reason I ask this question is that...
Don't you think so?
Yeah, no, definitely. The reason I ask this question is that one of the newish strands from Austin onwards to do with hermeneutics and meaning and intention with language is speech acts, isn't it? Saying that we can't, whether we say the intention is just in the work or in the biography or the intention or the viewer, maybe we've been too broad about text. What was a text doing in speech acts? Or is it just to make a grammatical sentence? Is it to try and cause a viewer or reader to behave differently, to do something? And I'm thinking maybe we should apply that with art as well. is the piece of artwork for you to sit on something, so it's very directly and clear, or is the artwork not meant to be a commentary specifically on the Cold War, but it's the intention was this ambiguous intention that is meant to make you feel sort of multiple feelings. You know, what was the equivalent of a speech act in art. So yeah.
Also with art and design, the designer makes a chair and the artist cuts the chair in half.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
they're both interested in chairs, but there is a sort of tension between the two.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But the speech act sort of creates an event, doesn't it?
In what way? Can you explain that?
I like just going to, if one gets married.
Yes.
You are now married.
Mm-hmm.
It's the act of saying it that causes it somehow.
Yeah, certainly can do. Yeah, definitely.
So perhaps there's this demonstrative aspect in art as well.
Mm-hmm.
The act of showing it is doing something in the world. So
Yes.
yeah, that could be. I think some people have been very keen on speech act and meaning in this respect.
It's very interesting. The more we've looked into this as an art movement, the more we've found it fascinating that because no one can really be a specialist in all these areas, it seems to be a lot of things for literature theory has been taken over in art theory that may not be fully applicable, and even the arts themselves, things like fine art, design, music, drama, speech, all these sorts of things I think need to be approached in slightly different terms. So for example, the public quality again is there's certainly a public quality to language. Is there such a public quality in art? Is there such a public quality in music? In some ways possibly more than all the others, because most people when they hear a sad tune don't feel happy. But it's very limited. If you think about what you can imply in music, what is it? Maybe anger, happiness, sadness. You can't imply by music alone jealousy, or these other more specific things you can through language. So that it's the public quality is very limited. And
unless you have an opera, and you can
then you've got language again, so it's no longer music on its own. But I think we've had a broad brush with all these interpretation theories, and it's just interesting to kind of to pick it apart a bit. Well, thank you so much. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much again at very late notice to allowing us to interview you. It's been really insightful and really helpful. And, thank you very much again. Nice to meet you.
Good talking to you.
Thank you, and you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's good.